How many of you are already familiar with this concept called flow theory? It is a concept first coined by the founding father of positive psychology, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he coined this concept back in the 1970s to describe a certain state of mind, which he argues is the optimal state of mind for learning. And here we're speaking about learning in general, not just learning confined to education. In fact, the people that Mihaly developed this concept around were learning things such as mountain climbing or playing chess, and they had all excelled in their craft and had become extremely good at what they do. And when Mihaly interviewed them, they all described flow-like experiences as the sole motivation for them to keep on pursuing their craft. To be in this certain state of mind called flow, the learning that is taking place has to be intentional, intrinsically motivated, and autotelic, meaning that the student has voluntarily chosen to take on the task of learning something, is pursuing the learning for the joy of being in the learning process in itself, and is not motivated by some sort of outward reward from their efforts. So when we're having a flow experience, Mihaly further distinguishes between two different states of self that we can be in. We can be in a state of self characterized by involuntary introspection, meaning that the self is trying to reconcile conflicting information in the conscious. This happens to us when what we're learning is either too easy or too difficult, causing us to feel either bored or anxious. On the other hand, we can be in a state of mind characterized by no involuntary introspection. Mihaly calls this psychic negentropy. In this state of mind, we don't have any meta thoughts about what we're doing or how we're doing it, so we're simply able to engage ourselves completely in our desired learning objective. I think we can all recall a learning experiment or a learning situation that has made us feel this way, whether we were playing or reading or doing sports or something else that we really enjoy doing and we see as a goal in itself to be doing. Today, I would like to invite you all to take part in an anthropological observational exercise where we will practice learning, this time about our physical surroundings, as well as practicing anchoring our attention in the present moment, which is a requirement for having a flow experience. Since anthropology is the science of the human being, anthropologists spend a great amount of time studying human behavior. We study things such as social interactions, we study the routes and routines of an individual, and we study all these other things that can help contribute with information about the phenomena that we're investigating. But a thing that we also study are objects and our physical surroundings. I remember when I first started studying anthropology, we were giving all these different tasks as to alter the way that we relate to our surroundings. And I recall the very first summer of our studies, we were out in this study camp with all the new students and our tutors. It was in this summer house area. And one warm afternoon, our tutors suddenly called us together, completely out of the blue. They divided us into groups, and they gave each group an empty plate. They then told us that on this empty plate, we had to return with a stack of pancakes. The catch was that we could not use any equipment from the kitchen where we were staying to prepare these pancakes. Neither could we go to the store and buy anything. So the idea was that we were to go from summer house to summer house and ask for the ingredients. But we could only ask for one ingredient per house. So we thought this is a very difficult exercise. But we actually managed to step out of our comfort zone and to go around visiting these beautiful summer houses and meeting these amazing people that all contributed with an ingredient for our pancakes. And actually, at the end of the day, all groups managed to come back to our tutors with a stack of pancakes. So, fast forward 6 months. Now we're back in Copenhagen, and this time we're having a seminar on anthropological methodology. Our professors again divided us into groups, and this time they told us to go out in the city of Copenhagen and choose a place where we could sit and observe our surroundings for 60 minutes. Some people chose to go to the train station, some people even chose to go to the park, but since it was a snowy and cold day back in January 2011, we kind of wanted to be cozy and have a cup of tea with our observations, so we chose to go to a cafe. So in the cafe, we sit down and we start taking notes in our little notebooks about what's going on around us. We were doing the first observational exercise for the day, and that was to observe everything, meaning that we had to look at all the social interactions that were going on, we had to observe all the objects that were present, and we kind of had to take all that in. So today, I would like to make a collective invitation for you all to take part in this exercise of observing everything, because as much as I would like to send you out and come back with a stack of pancakes for me, we just don't have the time. So let's all take just 60 seconds where we will look at our surroundings. If we could please have some light out in the room as well. Yes, and it's easier to observe. So let's just sit quietly for 60 seconds and observe our surroundings. Try to observe everything about it. And the 60 seconds start now. All right, so 60 seconds have passed. How many of you noticed this really horrible painting over there? I'm just kidding. All right, so how many of you could continue doing this exercise for another minute or two? It's actually a quite pleasant exercise to be doing. So, back in the cafe, we've been sitting there for 30 minutes and scribbling down notes in our little notebooks that we tried to hide under our bit winter jackets about how many plants were in the room, how many chairs, etc. And now we had to proceed with the more difficult of the exercise for the day. This time, we had to observe nothing. And we thought, how is this possible? We've just been observing everything in its meticulous detail, and now we're supposed to look at our surroundings and suddenly see nothing. But our professors have been giving us some instructions as to how to come across this kind of newfound curiosity and non-judgmental openness towards our surroundings. What they had told us to do was that we had to put ourselves in the shoes of aliens and kind of pretend that we had no prior experience whatsoever with any of the social interactions that were going on or any of the objects that were in place. We had to imagine that we had come from some faraway galaxy and didn't even have a clue what coffee was. That was the kind of level of curiosity that we had to engage with our physical surroundings with. So, with no further ado, I would like to make the other and final collective invitation for today. And this time I would like to invite you to observe nothing for 60 seconds. And the way we're going to do this exercise is that when something catches your attention anyway, you kind of delve into it as something that you have no prior experience with whatsoever. So let's again try and take 60 seconds where we will sit quietly, this time observing nothing. And our 60 seconds starts now. If we could have some light maybe again in the room, please. Thanks. All right, friends? So that was our 60 seconds of observing nothing. How many of you were able to relate to your surroundings with this kind of newfound curiosity? It is actually a quite difficult exercise. But see, what happens when we observe nothing and kind of catches ourselves before we go ahead and ascribe meaning and purpose to a situation or even an object, a person or a word, is that we slow down our thinking process. We have all been socialized into interpreting reality in a very specific way, and these interpretations happen so fast that it can be very beneficial for us to slow down our thinking process and start questioning the ways in which we automatically ascribe meaning to our surroundings. In this way, we can become aware of our own cultural biases and the way that we just automatically ascribe meaning to our surroundings. What we have just engaged in right now is a flow experience, where we have entered into an altered state of mind, into flow, by using our observatory senses. Mastering our observatory senses is a requirement for being in a flow state of mind, and the anthropological observational techniques can help us in that direction by directing our focus away from involuntary introspection and to the present moment. The thing about anthropological exercises and observational techniques is that anthropologists acknowledge that we cannot be fully separated from what we observe. In other words, we co-create what we observe by ascribing meaning and purpose to the observed. And these automatic ascriptions of meaning can become more conscious to us when we exercise observing our surroundings with an openness that allow us to catch ourselves in our automatic thinking processes. So by observing everything, but especially observing nothing, we can practice being in flow by exercising to anchor our attention into the present moment. So thank you so very much for participating with me today, and let's continue to stay in flow.